You want to talk about the dark side of the ring with Tony Atlas?
Let's talk about it. It was an interesting episode. Some interesting stories. And, what did you think?
There's one we'll get to that there's more to the story, and I wish we'd have got it, but I don't know what it is, and I don't know who would have told it. But first of all, I love the territory footage because, again, we've seen a lot of the footage that you would see of Tony Atlas normally in any of the WWE retrospectives would center on his time there. You've seen that stuff, but Dark Side incorporated stuff from Georgia and Louisiana and the Carolinas, et cetera, et cetera. And a lot of people forget that Tony in the 70s and early 80s, before he had even his first WWF run in 81, was it? Or thereabouts.
Yeah.
He'd been on top for a while and was a star in a lot of the territories. And I think Paul Bosch brought him into Houston around that era. But he was a great athlete, the size, the drop kick, the head scissors for a guy with that body, and then the legitimate strength also. And he was a freak of nature. And that's, why he was pushed. Even I saw him in, what was it? Goddamn, 78, probably. Definitely on television was 79 live. And that was 3 or 4 years into the business or whatever. He was still green. He had an unorthodox way of working anyway, but he was just so impressive looking and so quick and, had such charisma that the people got with it. And so they had good talking heads, Gerald Briscoe and Tommy Rich, David Crockett.
That was the straightest I've ever seen Tommy Rich in my entire life just sit there and talk. I don't know if straight is the right word, but like he just seemed with it more than any time I've ever seen him talk about things.
Yeah, and of course, I'm sure there was an editing process, but no, I see what you're saying. Yeah, well, he's calmed down in his old age. And Nick Patrick was on just to bury everybody about the quantity of drugs they used to do. And a lot of the first part of the show was Tony Atlas just telling stories about him as a kid, like Tony Atlas tells stories. And it went from getting brain damage to shopping for shoes for women to step on his face with. And then they show him going and shopping in the shoes and again, but it's not sexual. It's to calm him down and control his rage. Which, I don't know, Brian, if somebody was walking on your face, would that tend to stir up more of your rage than it would calm down?
I can't explain a lot of why, or I can't explain any of what he does. Me or Ricky Steamboat. Neither of us could explain any of this.
No, Steamboat was so fucking funny because Steamboat is such a good, wholesome, non-perverted type of guy for the wrestling business, right? That he was like,
But they talked about, who said it? Was it Jerry Briscoe? Someone said at the very beginning, oh, Tony and his stories, you don't know what to believe. Or they indicated that he tells stories. What did he say early on there that was outrageous? Like, what stood out as being, was it like, oh, there's no way he got brain damage? Well, I mean, what's the thing that stands out?
Well, no, I mean, I mean, there's a case to be made that Tony had some brain damage from early on.
Well, he made the case.
Scar on his head, and he made the case. But also, see, here's I hate to skip around, but what the fuck? We're having fun before WrestleMania here. The funniest part of this show to me was Murdoch and Tommy Rich taking him to a KKK meeting. Because here's the thing, Tony tells good stories, and sometimes Tony, all good storytellers, maybe sometimes they remember stories a little differently or whatever. But Tony, if that happened, if Dick Murdoch and Tommy Rich took Tony Atlas to a KKK meeting, then it was a fucking rib. if the story has not been wrestlers' exaggeration, but because you notice they had Tommy Rich on this show, but they didn't have any comments from him on. At least did I record any of them the KKK meeting. And
he must have been asked,
about,
and they must have asked him that if Tony brought it up.
Well, one would think, because here's the thing. Think about this. Because everybody's always said, oh, Dick Murdoch was in the KKK. I was around Dick a long time. He may not have been the most tolerant liberal that I've ever met, but he never tried to recruit me into KKK. He might have had a membership card that he could show people. A lot of the boys had shit they could show people. But do you think that Dick Murdoch would legitimately pull up to a KKK meeting with the world's largest black man in the car with him? He might get shot. But the way that Tony told the story, Murdoch was passing out these flyers in the locker room. You know, he said he was dyslexic, couldn't read or whatever. But when Murdoch asked him if he wanted to go, Tommy said, yeah, I'm going. And then later on, when they pull up and it's a Klan meeting and the guy's got guns, Tommy looks at Tony and says, I didn't read the flyer. Hello. And Tommy was Tony's tag team partner. They were fucking ribbing him. It's the same thing as when the Fargos would pick up a hitchhiker and one of them would shoot the other one and have the guy help dispose of the body. Or the fucking Mabel rib, where you send a new guy in a territory out in a fucking house in the woods to fuck some woman and her husband comes home with a shotgun.
Or the Briscoes putting a midget naked in their trunk to pop out at the
toll booth. Yeah, you know, or whatever. It's just the way that it was told by Tony. I'm sure he still believes it, maybe. If it happened, it had to be a fucking rib.
They didn't really give us an ending, did they? I mean, it was Tony Duck.
No.
But then what happened?
Tony Duck. And then it was, I guess they pulled away.
What happened? Yeah.
I guarantee you Murdoch where was this? Was this in Georgia?
It must have been Georgia. That was the only time those three were together at the same time, I think.
Well, okay. I bet you that Tommy Rich, because Murdoch didn't live and wasn't from Atlanta. I bet you Tommy Rich had some friends. Hey, me and fucking Murdoch pull up with Tony in the car, come out with them hoods on and carrying shotguns. That's the greatest shit in the world.
It could have only have been Atlanta or maybe Mid-South, because Tommy made an appearance or two because Watts owned a piece of Georgia, but I don't even know.
Yeah, but then did they know a bunch of guys that would be at a house that would come out in hoods? I don't know. But nevertheless, that's the thing, is that at least they had David Crockett, who was there at the time, because it was the guys that were working out. George and Sandy Scott were two of them that were working out at the YMCA that saw, who the fuck is that guy? And, instant interest. And the Crockett Promotions gave him one of the earlier developmental contracts, $150 a week, just to train to wrestle. And in, what would that have been, 1975? That's like $750 a week or whatever today. There were probably some of the boys on First Match at the time in the territory going, hey, what the fuck? And again, we've talked about Tony when we previewed the episode and talked with Evan Husney and et cetera. Tony legitimately was from small town Virginia and dirt poor. And, George Scott had to smarten him up. And he said, and this is true, I've heard the guys, he was disappointed when he found out the business was a work. But, by working with all the top guys in the Carolinas, and then they had a pipeline of relationship because they were next door to Atlanta and Barnett's territory, and Ole would bop back and forth and either be on top or book either one at different points. So he went to Atlanta to get the exposure on TBS, and Tony Atlas and Tommy Rich, TNT was a big fucking deal at that time. See what they did, TNT, because they were very explosive. And then, but at the same time, I should say, Tony tells the story. He admits it. That's the whole point of, his book and etc. Too much too soon. As soon as they put him on top, he was spending all the money. But it was like he wasn't like, like a rock star, like I'm going to buy a goddamn Maserati or whatever. He was a poor kid, like a boxer that came into money and started giving it away or buying shit for people. But when it was very easy for the guys in the Carolinas in, say, 77, 78, 79 to make $100,000 a year or more each, which would be close to $500,000 today. There's probably, 6 or 8 or 10 that was in that group when you look at the names that were in the territory and the business they were doing. And, but at the same time, he just didn't know how to handle it. But then again, you talk about the stories, Brian. They talked about the one of the car wrecks that they had with Tommy Rich, Nick Patrick, and Tony, and Tony said, well, it broke my neck. I don't remember him ever having a broken neck. Do you?
Well, he's so muscular. The muscles held his neck in place. He doesn't need the bones.
Well, no, that was Danny Hodge, and even he needed one hand. But the thing about when he went out, he had to hold one arm was holding his head in place while he swam out of the canal. But here's the thing with, I think at one point, Evan had told me that when they asked one of these guys about the wreck that they were in with Tommy Rich, whether it was Nick Patrick or Tony Atlas, they said, which one? Tommy was famous at that point in time when they got the northern tour started, where they would leave Atlanta and go up to Ohio, with Columbus being early TBS Central, and they opened up Columbus and Cincinnati and the towns in Michigan. Tommy Rich went through every rental car company that worked that area to the point where they stopped renting cars for the wrestlers, and they had to, I think, either start flying in different places or kayfabing assumed fucking people renting the cars to get the boys rental cars because Tommy had wrecked so many of them. Yeah, we heard that when we went into Atlanta in '85. We were still hearing the story of whatever you do, be careful with the rental cars.
Yeah, see, that's one of the things. This is Dark Side of the Ring, Tony Atlas, but Tony wasn't even the wildest person in his team.
Yeah.
From his downfall, Tommy Rich was the partner.
But yeah, then I got the notes here on the Dick Murdoch KKK rally. And unfortunately, I think, and I'll take a side note here because it's the same thing I'm thinking about. A lot of times, guys were easily wound up by other guys in the locker room, and they would be ribbing them, but they wouldn't know it, and they'd be believing shit. And I still think to this day that that's probably where poor Kamala thought that he only got paid 1/10 of what the Undertaker got paid, or whatever that issue was that he had. But but sometimes guys get wound up and they believe shit. And as Tony mentioned, he was developing substance issues. So maybe that led to him being a little more fucking susceptible. But then he said he no-showed winning the world title to get his face walked on. No, he no-showed shows, and Vince fired him, but he didn't no-show winning the world title. Did you see that part?
I did. I mean, you kind of glossed past the fact that the way it was presented here was then he finally got to the WWF, and now the famed WWF, I think it was called in this, and he had really made it, but it merged like his two early runs together. He wasn't there straight from 81 on. He was there from 81 to 82.
Yeah.
Made maybe appearances in 83, but no, by the end of 83, he was back, because that's when they did him and Rocky Johnson. But it wasn't just one giant run. He went to Mid-South. He was back in Georgia in 83, which is when a lot of this chaos actually happened in 83. So they merged it all together. As far as him winning the title and no-showing it, unless he was completely confused, and I'm not even saying this is true, and he was thinking Barnett would have given him the title for a week or a night or something to boost the Georgia territory. And even that, I haven't heard that story before. But that's where, it would have happened. I would think it would have been in Georgia. Because in WWF, when would it have even been a matchup after 1984? He was a babyface. He was
but now you're trying to put too many details into Tony's memory that's cloudy
I guess
to
so.
begin with. So. But never there was a problem with him making the towns to do other things, but not.
Did you know about the feet thing or the walking on his face with shoes thing, like back then in the 80s? Were people talking about it?
No, in the 80s, I don't. Well, and me personally, I don't believe I did, because I'd seen Tony obviously as a fan in the 70s, and I'd been at shows that he had worked on. But when I got in the business, it was years and years before we were actually in the same place. So I think there was some element by the 90s of, conversation about it. And then he just decided, well, we'll just open it up to the floor for discussion, but not like that far back. No. But, and here, I don't know what the timeline is here. I know what my involvement is, but they told the story after he was done with the WWF, and he got, I guess, the run was Savoldi first in ICW. He was living in Maine. And then, or did he come back as Saba Simba and then go to ICW?
No. What happened was he was in WWF, and then they either fired him or just let him or released him, and he went to go work for World Class when WWE let George Scott go there to book in 87, and he was Black Superman.
That's right.
And then after that, he went to work for Savoldi, ICW into IWCCW. They aired him against Vic Steamboat on that show way too many times. It's traumatic to think about how many times I had to see that. But, I mean, he said that, like, Vince was running the day before them in Maine to put them out of business, but IWCCW was kind of all over the area. It wasn't just centered in Maine, and I don't know about...
Yeah, well, besides that, no, the fact that Tony Atlas had gone to work for, a independent promotion in the Northeast was not cause for Vince McMahon to change his touring schedule in order to go in front of them. No, that's a little preposterous. And then, but the Vince bringing him back as Saba Simba, everybody made fun of that. And it was ridiculous and etc. But whatever the timing was, at this point, he becomes homeless and he's sleeping out in the park. But where I got involved in this was, and maybe you can tell me what time period Saba Simba was, because I know that I heard that he was open. And this was early 1993. And I've told you the story before when he sent me the plane ticket back, right?
Right. I mean, the rumor had always been that before you had decided on the Gangsta's gimmick, originally it was just you were going to give Tony Atlas a push. And when he turned it down...
Well, no, I'd never even seen or heard of the Gangstas as human beings on the planet. When I was trying to bring Tony Atlas in, it was a completely different thing. Because in early 93, he was available. He had just been in WCW is what it was. WCW had given him a short little run and he was gone from there.
That's right.
And I know, and I'll come to find why I know this in a second. And anyway, I got his phone number. Can't remember how, because originally, instead of Tammy being the manager of primetime Brian Lee as a heel, she was going to be the manager of Tony Atlas. The same thing was going to happen with Tammy. She was going to come in as the bitchy, collegiate, Northeast, preppy, feminist person that, everybody came to know and love, looking to buy the contract of a wrestler. But at the same time, I was going to bring Tony Atlas in as a heel, because even if his promos were never the best, and I think he was best as a promo when he was a babyface because he was so genuine and entertaining, but he was a heck of a heel look to him and he could still work, and he didn't have the beautiful body at that point in time, but he was still huge. And then to me, if you put little Tammy and big Tony together in the hills of East Tennessee and Eastern Kentucky, you'd probably get some heat. So I called Tony and we made a deal, and we were going to fly him down. I think it was we would fly him for, like, if it was a week where we had the weekend shows and then a TV, he would go home after that, but then he'd come back and stay 10 days, whatever the case. We had a place for him to stay. Agreed. I mean, he had no job. So he was going to take $500 a week. And the day the TV, we sent him a plane ticket. And the day of TV that he was supposed to start, me and Hildebrand in the car go by the post office and check the post office box, and he's mailed the ticket back. And he said, my wife, I still have the letter around here somewhere. My wife and I have gone over our expenses, and we feel that I'm unable to come to Tennessee at this time. And I was like, what the fuck?
Who wrote it? Who wrote it? Because I don't think he writes, does he?
It was typed. That's what expenses. My wife and I have gone over our expenses, and we feel that I cannot afford to come to Tennessee at this time. And he sent the plane ticket back, bless him. But come to find out later on, apparently, while he was in WCW, he had allegedly been on the road with WCW, but actually had been on the road doing whatever he's doing with a female, and his wife got hot about it and found out about it, and she didn't want him going to Tennessee, I guess, when she saw maybe a picture of Tammy to be managed by this beautiful blonde girl.
Would you use knowing that he has a thing for women walking on his face, and you were going to have this bossy, bitchy manager, would you have used it if you knew about it?
No.
Look at how tough he is with my new Nikes.
No, because if somebody was going to jump off a ladder onto his fucking chest with both feet, that's one thing. But no, it wouldn't show how tough my giant fucking heel was. She would be bossing him around verbally because she was a bossy little bitch, was Tammy. But she wouldn't be walking on his fucking face.
And you asked about when he was homeless. So going back to that, he was Saba Simba.
Well, that's why I'm wondering when in relation to when he turned me down for the $500 a week job in Transit, he became homeless.
I think it was a while before that, because there's only 2 periods of time I think it could be without knowing exactly when. It would have been right before he went in as Saba Simba, which was late 1990. And he was the IWCCW World Champion a little bit before that, so he may have been homeless while working for them. And then after Saba Simba, he showed up again in WCW when Bill Watts was there briefly as a heel, and then he was really quickly gone. But that's right before you would have been calling him about Smoky Mountain in 93.
But there you go.
So I think it probably was before WWF. Otherwise, he couldn't have been on a bench for a year and a half.
He would have got a lot of splinters off of that. So,
or was he homeless but still work? He doesn't say it like that. Like, I was homeless, but I also made 3 dates a week, for Savoldi.
Well, for a while he was homeless and making dates, apparently, from his book and etc. But so I guess this Monica, the wife he still has, and bless them, they're still together. But maybe she was the one that didn't want him to come to Tennessee. But here's the goddamn thing. You never know how things are going to fucking work, right? But for Tony Atlas, who had just been let go by WCW and who was homeless at some point contingent around this time and had no job, turned down a top heel spot in Smoky Mountain Wrestling where he probably would have dominated the television 2 months before we started working with the WWF. And here would be one of their former fucking big stars, but now he'd have a whole new look. And think about how many guys in the following 2 years went back to or to for the first time the WWF off our television.
See, that's one of the sad things, too. When he went into Saba Simba, that was off him finally having a really cool heel look with IWCCW. May have been a small promotion on Sports Channel, but he had like the facial hair and he was managed by Tony Rumble.
Yeah.
He had a heel persona that was working. And then Vince saw Coming to America and said, oh, we'll make him Saba Simba. And then again, they talk about the first match. Piper's on commentary. That's Tony Atlas. What the fuck are you doing?
And that was the whole thing. And it was so blatantly ludicrous that had buried him. He needed to go away for a while and come up with some other presentation, make the people forget about that. But again, that's the deal. He'd ended up working for me in fucking 2 months. A lot of our guys would be going to the WWF to begin with. But nevertheless, we can't dwell in the past, can we?
Sure we can. That's what we do.
Well, that's actually what we do. Yes. And then he got inducted in the Hall of Fame and managed Mark Henry and got fired after Vince told him that everything was fine and he was going to be there for a long time. But
they left off the part anyway, remember they brought him back in 96? In 96, I think it was 96, briefly, he was with The Rock or Rocky Maivia.
Was he?
They showed him in the crowd like watching Rocky Maivia.
My God, I was there and I barely remember this now that you've brought it up.
Hey, listen, if Darkseid wants an episode that'll get a lot of buzz and that would actually fit the show and be really good, do Rocky Johnson. I dare you. Dark Side of the Ring, Rocky Johnson. I double dog dare you, as some may say.
Oh my God, the double dog has been dared. The only thing that follows that's the triple dog, and then somebody's balls are in a vice.
I remember on a Legends house, like Jim Duggan and especially Roddy Piper were getting, or actually it was especially Jim Duggan, were getting really annoyed with Tony Atlas. They found him to be like the most annoying guy. And I could see that, but he also seems like the nicest guy in the world.
He's nice and he's entertaining and he's, personable, and maybe the energy alone might get a little stressful after a while. But anyway, at the end of the program, this was one of the few dark sides that at least has somewhat of a nice ending, that he and his wife, who had a stroke and has been in the hospital for, like I said, 5 or 6 years, but they're still together. He goes and visits her and takes care of her in the hospital, and apparently still wrestles at some fan fest or whatever, because he said I got to make a living. But Mark Henry taking over for Shakespeare as the profound philosopher of the piece said it's never too late to wash the mud off your face and act like you got some damn sense. Words to live by, Brian, don't you think?
I think so. I mean, it was kind of like Dark Side of the Ring if the Dark Side of the story ended in 1990. And then it's been like 35 years of a wonderful woman taking care of this very nice man.
Well, but in next week, Superstar Billy Graham, baby, or this week, or however it's phrased, the next episode of that coming up this week on the next Dark Side.
You know what I hope they figure out on there and say? They probably won't, because it's only me wanting this. When did he start with the I'm going to die within a few months thing? Because he was about to die for like 35 years straight. It was like, you'd see him, and then he was like, oh, he looks pretty good. And then you'd hear him like talking, like, my hip's done, and this is done, and this, and my organs, and oh my God, he's about to go. And then he'd like say like he was about to go, and then like he'd be around for another 25 years, but that can't happen.
Bone transplants and things happen. My God, we're praying for Superstar, and he'd live to be 80. If they have a death tracker, he started it in. Maybe it was Gorilla Monsoon calling him dead in that newspaper column, put the curse on him and started the downhill slide.
And that was 10 years earlier, because like 10 years later, he was in a wheelchair, like saying like, I'll never walk again. The dastardly steroids. I'm going to die tomorrow. Whatever, and then, he lived forever. The power of the superstar.
The power of the superstar, the man of the hour.
They better mention the poster, right? They have to mention the famous Billy Graham poster that was sold in the magazines.
Oh yeah, I'm hoping they found. I didn't have one. I'm hoping they found one. I had one from the Japanese magazine, a nice one of him with the belt, big full color poster that they could shoot, but I didn't have the tiger poster.
The tiger one is the one that matters, yeah.
Well, just shit all over me then. So I'm nothing. My whole life has been wasted because I don't have that one poster, is what you're saying to me now.
This is how Dark Side of Jim Cornette starts. The depression because of this.
Yeah, I'm going to go into a spiral. It's like Vince taking the belt away from me. I don't have the poster. You've mocked me. I'm going into a spiral. You know what? With Dark Side of the Ring, on a Tony Atlas episode, you know, Brian, what would have made a perfect tie-in? Because all those videos and all those shots, well, no, all those videos and all those shots of Tony Atlas with his getting his face walked on and stepped on by women in tennis shoes and various other non-feminine type of footwear. If he was laying on a Helix sleep mattress, that would be a way to demonstrate how comfortable you are on a Helix mattress, that if you're laying on one of the fine quality Helix mattresses that they make, like the Luxe collection or the Elite collection, that even if somebody's just walking around on your nasal passages and stepping on your eye sockets and putting their heel into your mouth and stomping on your tongue, you're still comfortable like you're in a baby in its mother's arms. Now, what they will do is they will allow you to put this to the test. Because if you check a special box on the 2025 order, they will send about a 50-year-old woman that used to work as a librarian wearing tennis shoes. When you unpack your Helix mattress, she will walk all the fuck over your face.
There will be no former librarians. There'll be no any of this except for a mattress showing up at your door that you buy because it's a wonderful mattress. There is indeed a survey, but there isn't a box for this. Trying to correct it all in one fell swoop. Helix.
Well, see, they can't guarantee she would have been a librarian. Sometimes the supplies run low, but that adds to the fucking fantasy, the whole thing. But folks, that's all you do is you go to helixsleep.com and you take the quiz. You pick out a mattress that you like. Once again, from any of those fine collections, they got mattresses that'll cool you down, ones that'll heat you up, ones if you like to sleep in any kind of position and the support you need. And you take that quiz and then you pick the mattress that they select for you based on that information. It's delivered to your door. And you unbox it, you put it on the bed frame or whatever surface you are going to indeed be supining your position and resting in. And then you just close your eyes. And this fucking woman, she looks like she ought to be working at the goddamn Target. She will just, she'll stand on your right side of your face, then she'll walk on the left side of your face, and then she'll put her feet up under your nose and give you a little adjustment there. And then she'll slap you in the side of the face with a bare foot with her toes hanging out. And then she'll go on about her business. But you got to hurry because that's only for the spring.
Speaking about business, Jim, I think you're giving us the business. There will be no old lady. There will be no slapping. You said she was 50 earlier. How old do you think she is? There will be no woman stepping on anyone's face. Of course, unless you go to the Tony Atlas message board or something. But what you can get is a fine mattress just for you. They look at your survey. They don't just look at it. They honor your survey. They look at the results of your survey and they say, let's give this man the mattress he deserves.
Look at the way this weirdo likes to sleep. And, and there is also, you can make a list of the people currently sleeping with you. They need that information too, just their records.
The bare basics of information necessary for a
really just age, birth date, social security number, and measurements.
No social security
is all they need.
Keep it to yourself.
And the measurements depend on whether it's a male or a female. The females have more numbers. The men, they're just interested in one.
This is turning into the chain gang interview where we're both just talking at the same time, trying to save this thing.
If you've got snoring, back pain, sleep apnea, or any of those conditions, well, normally I'd say you're fucked. But Helix, they can help you too, because their mattresses will boy. If what you do is you turn over and you have one of these mattresses sit on your face, and that eliminates the snoring. Nobody can hear you at least. So it's good if people are in the next room.
Again, I don't even know what you're, no. Just,
what you do is you just reverse your sleeping position. Instead of sleeping on your back on top of the mattress, you sleep on your face underneath the mattress, and then nobody can hear you snoring.
What do you mean sleep on your face? It would be your back or your belly, not your face. How do you sleep on your face?
Well, no, it'd be your face because the mattress is on top of you. Your back is still on the mattress. You're just reversing that whole procedure.
Listen, this does not sound safe or advisable, and thus it is not. And of course, Helix Sleep guarantees you a good night's sleep. I think that's what we can say. There's something that we can say, and what we can say is that we personally really like Helix Sleep mattresses, and I guarantee you that I like Helix Sleep. I can guarantee that, Jim.
Well, I can guarantee you the same thing, that I like the Helix Sleep mattress, and I can guarantee you that if you tip that woman $20, she'll lighten up on that face walking. Right now, folks, if you go to helixsleep.com/JCE, well, you are indeed going to get 20% off and 2 free pillows from our fine friends at Helix Sleep. That's all you got to do. helixsleep.com/JCE. They might give you something else. They might give you a better deal. If you just slash that JCE in there, they'll know you're one of the cool kids. helixsleep.com/JCE. You're going to save a lot of money. You're going to get a lot of good stuff. And nobody will be able to hear you snore under there.
A fine mattress for you and the entire family. We love them here. They love them in Louisville. You'll love them wherever the hell you are. Helix Sleep, one more time, Jim. That link and promo code.
Yes, the link and promo code JCE. That's terribly difficult to remember.